Hey there, fellow knowledge seekers. Ever catch yourself thinking like, wait, am I really sure about this?
Yeah.
That's metacognition in action, right?
It is, yeah.
It's basically like your brain double-checking its own work. And
Yeah.
get this, there's a whole field of research dedicated to like figuring out how good we are doing that.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot more complex than people might think. I mean, there are so many different ways that people have tried to, measure metacognition.
Right.
But it's really hard to figure out which ones actually work.
Yeah. So you sent us a whole stack of research on this.
I did.
And we really dug deep into a paper by Dobromir Rahnev
Yes.
from Georgia Tech School of Psychology.
That's right, yeah.
And it puts all these different measurement methods to the test.
It does, 17 of them to be exact. And this research is, it's not just for academics.
Right.
It has, real implications for how we learn, how we make decisions.
For sure.
Even, our own self-awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get lost in the details here,
Yeah.
let's break down what metacognitive ability really means.
Yeah, it's basically how well you know when you're right or wrong. You can think of it like, you're learning a new recipe. So you're learning a new recipe, and instead of just blindly following the instructions,
Right.
you taste as you go, right? And you adjust based on what you think needs tweaking.
Yeah.
And that's your metacognition, helping you learn actively.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great analogy. So this paper tackles the question of how to actually measure this kind of like inner critic ability.
Exactly. The researchers, they looked at these 17 different methods,
Yeah.
and each one has its own kind of quirks. It's sort of like if you were, comparing different tools in a toolbox.
Yeah.
Some are really precise, some are more general purpose.
Right. So how do we know if a tool that's supposed to measure metacognition is actually giving us an accurate reading, right? Like how do we...
Well, that's where the ideas of validity and precision come in.
Okay.
So validity is about, does the tool measure what it claims to measure?
Okay.
So, like, imagine your bathroom scale is telling you that you weigh 300 pounds when you actually weigh 150.
Right.
Well, it's not a very valid measure.
Right. Yeah. Not good.
Yeah.
And then precision.
Yeah, precision is about, like, how consistent are the measurements?
Okay.
So our wonky bathroom scale, it might say 150 pounds one day, 160 the next, and 145 the day after.
Oh, gosh.
Not very precise.
Not at all. Yeah. Not reliable.
No.
So how did the researchers actually test the validity and the precision of these measures?
Well, they got really clever. What they did was they intentionally messed with people's confidence ratings in these experiments to see if the measurements would pick up on it. So it's sort of like
interesting.
seeing if you can fool a lie detector test.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Clever. So were the measures fooled? What did they find?
Well, the results were pretty interesting. It turns out that almost all of the measures actually passed the validity test.
Okay.
So they seem to be measuring metacognition, for the most part.
Okay.
But when it came to precision, there was a lot more variation. Some were very precise.
Yeah.
And some were all over the place.
So we have this toolbox.
Yeah.
But some of the tools are sharper than others.
Exactly.
But it gets even more complicated than that, right?
It does.
Like there's other things that can throw off these measurements.
Yeah, it's not always just as simple as giving someone a test. There are these things that we call nuisance variables that can really mess with the results.
Yeah.
They're like little gremlins in the data.
Gremlins. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. What kind of gremlins are we talking about here?
Well, there are three main ones. There's task performance, metacognitive bias, and response bias.
All right. Let's unpack these gremlins one by one.
Okay.
What's task performance all about?
So task performance is pretty straightforward. It's basically that, some measures get thrown off by how well someone actually does on the task.
Right.
Not just how accurately they judge their own performance.
Right.
You know how, like, sometimes after you ace a test, you feel really confident?
Oh, yeah.
That might not actually be metacognition. That might just be a side effect of doing well.
Okay, so it's not just about how well you think you did,
No.
but it's how that lines up with your actual performance.
Exactly.
Okay. What about metacognitive bias? Is that like overconfidence?
Yeah, you got it. So some people are just naturally more confident than others, regardless of whether or not they're actually right or wrong.
Right, yeah.
The trouble is that some of these measures can't really tell the difference
Right.
between this kind of natural tendency and true metacognitive ability.
So it's like trying to, measure someone's height when they're wearing platform shoes?
Exactly. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
not going to get an accurate measurement.
Not going to get a good reading.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last gremlin, response bias.
So response bias is the tendency to, like, favor one answer over another, even if it's subconscious. So, like, let's say you're taking a multiple choice test and you're not sure of the answer.
Yeah.
Maybe you always pick C.
Right.
And this can really skew the results and make it look like someone has, either better or worse metacognition than they actually do.
Yeah. So we have our measures, we have our gremlins. What did the researchers find out about how these things all interact?
Well, buckle up, because this is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I'm all ears.
All right. So it turns out task performance, that was the biggest gremlin of them all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of the measures, they really struggled to separate someone's actual performance on the task from their metacognition about that performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if a measure is technically valid, right?
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be measuring metacognition, but these gremlins can still throw a wrench in the works.
Exactly. And that kind of leads into another really important concept, which is reliability.
Okay.
Can we actually trust these measurements over time?
Oh, okay. So reliability is like
Yeah.
consistency, right? Like if I step on this, that wonky bathroom scale 10 times in a row,
Right.
I'd want it to at least give me like roughly the same number,
Yeah.
even if it's not my true weight.
Exactly. You got it. And there are actually two types of reliability that we look at.
Okay.
There's split half reliability and retest reliability.
Okay.
So split half reliability, that's all about internal consistency. It's like asking, if we split the data from a test in half,
Okay.
do both halves tell us the same story?
So like it's checking if the measure is kind of consistent within itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's retest reliability. And this one is about whether or not you get similar results if you test someone again, like on a different day.
Right.
It's kind of like, hoping that your cooking skills don't suddenly disappear by next week.
Oh, I feel that one. Yeah, sometimes my culinary metacognition fails me, and I end up with like a very sad-looking cake.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah. So how do these measures fare in the reliability department?
Well, the good news is that split half reliability is generally pretty good,
Okay.
but retest reliability,
Right.
not so much.
Okay, so that means that like the results might not be stable over time.
Right.
Like someone could get a high metacognition score one day and then a low score the next, even if their actual abilities haven't really changed.
Yeah, that's the issue. And it has pretty big implications for research because it means that we need really large sample sizes
Yeah.
to get a reliable picture of individual differences in metacognition.
So even with the best tools, we're still facing this challenge of like getting a clear and consistent picture of metacognition. It all sounds pretty complicated.
It is.
What does this mean for, researchers going forward? Where do we go from here?
Well, this study is kind of a huge wake-up call for the field, I think. It's like
Okay.
it's like shining a spotlight on all the strengths and weaknesses of our current like tool box,
So we're not totally starting from scratch.
No, not at all.
But we definitely have some work to do.
We do. And it's not just about finding one perfect measure.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding the limitations of each one.
Right.
And choosing the right tool for the job.
Like it's like a chef knowing like when to use a paring knife versus a cleaver, depending on what they're trying to make.
Exactly. Yeah. Good analogy. And speaking of choosing wisely, this research also highlights how important it is to, really carefully control for these nuisance variables that we've been talking about.
Right.
Especially task performance. Researchers really need to be careful to make sure they're actually measuring metacognition and not just how well someone did on a task.
That makes sense because a high metacognition score could just mean that the task was super easy, not that the person necessarily has, incredible metacognitive abilities.
Exactly, yeah. And then we also need to be mindful of that metacognitive bias too.
Right.
Someone who is just naturally overconfident, they might score higher on some of these measures,
Right.
even if their actual metacognitive skills are just average.
So it's about being really precise with like how we design these experiments so that we can kind of tease apart all these different factors and get a clear picture of what's really going on.
That's the goal, yeah. And of course, as we talked about, with those low retest reliability scores, that means we need to be using much larger sample sizes in studies that are looking at individual differences in metacognition.
Okay, so bigger sample sizes, careful control of those gremlins.
Yes.
Choosing the right measure for the job.
Yes.
Sounds like a recipe for good metacognition research.
You got it. And the more we improve those research methods, the more we're going to learn about this amazing ability and how we can, use it to improve our lives.
Well, this deep dive has been so eye-opening already.
Oh, good.
I'm definitely going to be more aware of my own metacognitive processes from now on.
That's great.
But before we get too meta here, I am curious about something. So the paper that we've been talking about focused on these perceptual tasks, like seeing things.
Right.
But what about metacognition in other areas of life?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that researchers are really actively exploring.
Yeah.
Metacognition isn't just about visual perception. It pops up everywhere, from problem solving to our social interactions.
So it's like this research has opened a door to a whole new world of possibilities.
It has.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And I want to make sure that our listeners have time to digest all this fascinating information.
Good point. We can always, we can dive deeper into those other areas another time.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up for today, let's take a quick break. Stay tuned, folks. Yeah. We'll be right back to explore, the wider implications of metacognition and what it all means for you. And we're back, ready to explore how metacognition kind of plays out in the real world.
Yeah, for sure. We've been talking about all the science behind measuring metacognition.
Right.
But I think it's really important to, connect this back to everyday life because, this isn't just some abstract concept. It really does affect, how we make decisions, how we learn new things, how we relate to other people.
Absolutely. It's not just happening in a lab. It's everywhere. So where do we actually see metacognition in action in the real world?
Well, let's think about, your finances.
Well,
so, metacognition is at work when you're budgeting, saving, investing, knowing what you know.
Right.
And even more importantly, knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Can make a huge difference in how well you do financially.
Right. It's like knowing when to trust your gut feeling about an investment.
Yes.
Versus when to seek out advice from, an actual financial expert.
Exactly. Or, let's think about relationships. Metacognition really helps us understand our own emotions, our thought patterns, and even the emotions and the thoughts of our partners. It allows for, empathy, better communication,
right?
Stronger connections.
That's so true. Yeah, being able to, step back from a conflict and reflect on your own reactions or try to really understand where your partner's coming from.
Yes.
That's metacognition in action.
It is.
And of course, we can't forget about learning.
Learning, yeah.
Metacognition is so fundamental to that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Knowing how you learn best, what strategies work for you when you need to ask for help.
Yeah.
Clarification.
Yeah.
These are all metacognitive skills.
They are.
That can just make a huge difference in how effectively you learn new things, whether you're in school, at work, or just in life.
It's true.
Having this inner learning coach.
Yeah.
Always there to guide you.
That's a great way to put it.
And help you figure out the best approach. I never really thought about it that way before.
So you see, metacognition is really woven into the fabric of our daily lives.
It is.
It influences our choices, our relationships,
right?
Even our sense of self. It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
And the more we understand it, the better we can use it to our advantage.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a whole new perspective on metacognition.
Oh, good. I'm good.
I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to those thinking about thinking moments from now on.
It's a fascinating journey.
It is.
It's a fascinating journey of self-discovery, and this research that we talked about today, it's a big step forward.
It is.
In really starting to unravel the mysteries of metacognition. It's laying the groundwork for us to, develop even better ways to measure it, to understand it, and to harness its power.
I am so glad we took this deep dive together. It's amazing to think about the potential here. Imagine if we could all just learn to use our metacognitive skills, even more effectively.
Yeah.
What kind of impact could that have on our lives?
Oh, the possibilities are really endless. It could revolutionize education, improve decision-making in all areas of life,
right.
And even, just enhance our relationships with ourselves.
For sure.
And with others.
It's really exciting to think about. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
On the world of metacognition measurement.
Yes. Keep thinking about your thinking, everyone, and stay curious about, the incredible power of your own mind.
Until next time, fellow knowledge seekers.